It is a weekday morning in 1955, in a kitchen somewhere in the American Midwest, and a woman is making breakfast for 4 children before school. On the counter sits a heavy slab of gleaming chrome, streamlined like the grille of a new Buick. She takes 2 slices of bread and drops them into the slots. She does not push a lever. There is no lever. The bread, under its own weight, begins to sink, slowly, silently on its own, lowered by the machine as if the toaster has decided to do its job. There is no ticking timer. There is no spring wound up and waiting to fire. Inside, a small strip of metal is quietly watching the bread, reading the heat coming off its surface, waiting for the exact moment it reaches the perfect golden brown. And then, without a pop, without a bang, without so much as a click, the finished toast rises back up into the morning light. It will do this perfectly for the next 50 years. That toaster built in 1949 is still better, by the judgment of working engineers today, than the toaster sitting on your counter right now. America knew how to build it, and then America decided, on purpose, to stop. This is a story of why. Let's be clear about something up front, because it sounds like the kind of thing an old-timer says about everything. They don't make them like they used to. Usually, that's just sentiment. This time, it's measurably true. The toaster in question is the Sunbeam Radiant Control, and it has quietly become one of the most legendary objects in the entire world of vintage appliances. People hunt for them. A working one that you might once have found at a thrift store for $10 now sells for well over $200. Mechanical engineers, people who design machines for a living, watch how this thing works and openly admit it makes them feel inadequate. It has no computer chip, no electromagnet, no motor, no digital timer. It was designed before the transistor was in common use, and it still does the one job a toaster has more reliably, more consistently, and more elegantly than a $300 modern machine. To understand how that's possible and why we abandoned it, you have to look at what's actually happening inside it, because what's happening inside it is close to genius. Anyone who has actually used one describes the same small moment of disbelief. You drop the bread in. That's it. That's the entire interaction. You don't press anything down. The toaster feels the weight of the bread, and a system of finely balanced levers gently lowers the slices into the heat at exactly the right speed. Slow enough that nothing slams, smooth enough that it looks almost alive. Then it watches. As the bread toasts, it radiates heat, and the sensor inside reads that heat directly off the surface of your bread. The moment the bread itself reaches the doneness you selected, the toaster stops and lifts it back up, quietly, without the violent metallic clang that every modern toaster makes. And the toast is perfect. Not perfect once, perfect every single time. The first slice and the 10th slice, white bread or rye, fresh or half-frozen, the same golden brown over and over for decades. People who grow up with cheap toasters genuinely do not believe a toaster can do this until they see it. Many, after seeing it, go looking for one. Here's the part that turns a kitchen gadget into something worth 30 minutes of your attention. The Sunbeam Radiant Control is not really a story about a toaster. It's a story about a decision American industry made, quietly, over the second half of the 20th century, about what kind of things it was going to make and why. For one brief stretch, an American company built a small appliance as if its only goal was to be the best object of its kind that could possibly exist. Cost almost didn't matter. Longevity was the point. Build it once, build it right, build it to outlive the buyer. And then that philosophy lost. Not because someone invented a better toaster, because someone realized that a toaster this good was a terrible way to make money, and the entire industry quietly agreed to make worse things on purpose. To see how good the best actually was, we have to go back to a company that started out shearing sheep. The company that created the greatest toaster in history did not begin in kitchens. It began in barns. In the 1890s in Chicago, Two men named John K. Stewart and Thomas J. Clark founded the Chicago Flexible Shaft Company. Their business was farm equipment, mechanical horse clippers and sheep shearers, the rugged hand-cranked tools used to shave livestock across the American heartland. That heritage matters because it baked a certain attitude into the company's DNA. Build mechanical things that take abuse and keep working, year after year in conditions that would destroy a delicate machine. Over the following decades, the company moved into household appliances under a brand name that would become famous, Sunbeam. And in 1946, it formally renamed itself the Sunbeam Corporation. By then, it was producing mixers, shavers, irons, and small appliances with a reputation for quality. So when Sunbeam's engineers set out in the late 1940s to build a better toaster, they were not a startup chasing a trend. They were a 50-year-old machine company that knew in its bones how to make something that would not break. The breakthrough came from a Sunbeam engineer named Ludwig J. Kosey. Working in 1948, Kosey was wrestling with the oldest problem in toasting. Every automatic toaster of the era worked on a timer, a little clockwork mechanism pioneered decades earlier that simply counted out a fixed number of seconds and then ejected the bread. The trouble is that a timer doesn't actually know anything about your toast. It doesn't know if the bread is thick or thin, fresh or stale, white or whole wheat, and worst of all, it doesn't know how hot the toaster already is. Kosey's idea was to throw the timer out entirely and let the toaster do something radical: watch the bread. On January 18, 1949, Sunbeam was granted his patents, one for a radiation thermostat control for a toaster, one for the toaster's control mechanism. The streamlined chrome body that would house it was shaped by the industrial designer Robert Davil Budlong, the same man who styled some of the era's iconic radios. Kosey had not just designed a toaster, he had taught a toaster to perceive. It's worth slowing down on why Kosey's idea was so clever, because it's the whole secret. Every cheap toaster, including the one you probably own, is essentially guessing. It runs the heating elements for a set time or until a single internal sensor heats up and then it quits. It is timing the toaster. It is not measuring the toast. Kosey's toaster measured the toast. Inside, a bimetallic strip, two metals bonded together that bent predictably when heated, sat near the bread and read the radiant heat coming off the bread's surface as it browned. When the bread itself reached the exact temperature that corresponds to your chosen shade of golden brown, the strip bent just enough to trip the mechanism and lift the toast. The darkness control did something beautifully simple. It just moved that sensing strip slightly closer to or farther away from the bread. No guessing, no timing. The toaster responded to reality, to the actual condition of the actual bread, which is exactly why it never got it wrong. Now look at everything Sunbeam managed to leave out of this machine, because that's where the engineering becomes almost unbelievable. There is no electric motor lowering the bread. The bread descends purely on its own weight, through a system of carefully tensioned cantilevers and levers, tuned so precisely that tooth slices sink at a slow, graceful, controlled rate. The machine harvests the energy of you simply setting the bread down. There is no computer, no circuit board, no microchip, no electromagnet holding the carriage down, the failure-prone part that kills most modern toasters. No clockwork timer to wear out. The entire intelligence of the device is mechanical and thermal. Levers, springs, and a strip of metal that bends in the heat. That's why it lasts. There is almost nothing in it that can fail, and what can fail, a cord, a screw, a spring, can be fixed at a kitchen table with hand tools. People routinely take 70-year-old units, replace a frayed cord, and put them right back into daily service. A 1949 buyer paid around $25 for this, a serious sum at the time, the equivalent of several $100s today. But they were buying a machine engineered to be repaired and used for half a century, and it delivered. Here is the detail that makes people genuinely angry at their own kitchen, and it's worth letting it land. Think about what your toaster does on a busy morning. The first slice comes out fine, but the second batch, it comes out darker, sometimes much darker, even though you didn't touch the dial. Why? Because your toaster runs on a timer, and after the first round, the whole machine is already hot. The timer counts out the same seconds, but the bread cooks faster in the preheated toaster, so your timer-based toaster systematically burns the later slices. The 1949 Sunbeam does not have this problem. It cannot have this problem because it isn't counting seconds, it's reading the bread. A hot toaster, a cold toaster, the first slice or the 15th, it doesn't matter. The sensor only releases when the bread reaches the right doneness. Full stop. So a toaster designed before color television solved a problem that a modern $300 toaster still gets wrong today. That's not nostalgia. That's an indictment. If you're old enough, there's a good chance you've already pictured one of these. Maybe it was on your grandmother's counter, chrome gone slightly cloudy, with the faint ghost of a melted Wonder Bread bag fused to one side. Maybe your grandfather is still using his. There are people whose family toaster has run every morning since 1961 and has never once been replaced. Maybe you remember the marketing because Sunbeam sold this thing with one of the great slogans in appliance history, automatic beyond belief. They even pitched it as the perfect wedding gift, a toaster you'd register for because it would outlast a marriage. And there's a whole modern subculture built around finding them. People walk into a Goodwill, spot that unmistakable chrome shape on a shelf for $5 or $10, and feel their heart jump. If you've ever owned one or hunted one down, say where you found yours. Somebody reading this has the exact same model gathering dust in a cabinet. Sunbeam knew it had something special, and it kept the design alive for an astonishingly long time. The original 1949 model, the T20, was followed by a parade of refinements. The T35 in the 1950s with its gold medallion, the T40 in 1962 that swapped the hidden knob for a sleek slide control, higher wattage versions in the 1970s, but the core idea, Kochi's radiant control mechanism, stayed essentially the same for decades because it simply could not be improved upon. The machines were built largely in America, with some made in Canada and special voltage versions in Australia. Today, collectors speak about it the way enthusiasts talk about a Leica camera or a vintage BMW motorcycle, a cult object whose engineering integrity puts everything that followed to shame. Working units trade for $150 to $300 and climbing. A toaster built to last 50 years that people now pay a premium to own 70 years later. By every measure of quality, it was a triumph. By every measure of business, it was a disaster. Put yourself in the shoes of an executive at an appliance company in the 1960s, looking at the Sunbeam Radiant Control, and you start to see the trap. This toaster is a masterpiece. It also happens to be a financial nightmare for the people who make toasters. Think about the math. If your toaster lasts 50 years, then you sell one toaster to a household roughly once every half century. The customer is delighted, but your factory needs to sell toasters every year forever to stay in business. A product that never breaks is a product that never needs replacing, and a customer who never comes back. On top of that, this particular toaster was expensive to build. All those precision levers, that hand-tuned mechanism, the heavy chrome. It costs far more to manufacture than a simple spring and timer pop-up. So the industry faced a quiet, fundamental choice. You could build the best toaster possible and sell each customer one in their lifetime, or you could build a cheap toaster that breaks and sell that same customer a new one every few years forever. You already know which one they chose. The shift didn't come with an announcement. It came as 1,000 small decisions, all pointing the same direction: down. Manufacturers moved toward the cheapest possible way to brown bread, Out went the radiant sensor that read the actual toast. In came the simple timer and the electromagnet, the cheap parts that cost pennies and conveniently wear out. Out went the heavy American-made chrome and the repairable mechanism. In came lightweight plastic, sealed housings you couldn't open, and components designed to be thrown away rather than fixed. The result is the landscape of your kitchen appliance aisle today. As one observer put it, for the inflation-adjusted price of a single 1949 Sunbeam, you can buy roughly 17 modern bargain toasters, every one of them riding on the same failure-prone electromagnets and timer circuits, every one of them destined for a landfill sooner rather than later. This is the thing people mean without quite being able to prove it when they say things used to be built better. They were. The proof is a chrome toaster from 1949 that still works. We didn't lose the ability to build it, we decided it wasn't worth building. The Sunbeam Radiant Control held on far longer than its economics deserved, but the tide was against it. After more than 4 decades, production finally wound down in the 1990s, by most accounts ending around 1995. The best toaster ever made was discontinued, not because anyone built a better one, but because the world had decided it preferred cheaper. In fairness, it wasn't only money. The toaster had one genuine flaw, and honesty demands we name it. By modern safety standards, the Sunbeam is a bit of a liability. Touch the wrong metal part while it's running, and you can get a real shock or burn. It was built in an era with very different ideas about electrical safety, and that alone would make it hard to sell today. But that's a footnote, not the cause. The real cause was simpler and sadder. A machine built to last 50 years cannot compete in a market that has decided things are supposed to break. So they stopped making it, and nothing has matched it since. The story doesn't quite end in defeat, though. The Sunbeam Radiant Control has been rediscovered, and it has become a kind of quiet rebellion against the world of disposable everything. A single online video about it sent collectors scrambling and prices soaring. People now seek these toasters out, learn to repair them, replace the old cords, polish the chrome, and put them back into daily service, choosing a 70-year-old machine over anything on a store shelf today. It's part of a larger movement you may have noticed. People deliberately hunting for old tools, old appliances, old machines built in the era when American manufacturing aimed for excellence instead of turnover. Buy it for life, they call it. The Sunbeam is one of its patron saints. Every one of those restored toasters humming away on a kitchen calendar in 2026 is a small argument. It says that the choice America made, cheaper over better, disposable over durable, was a choice, not a law of nature. And choices can be made differently. In 1949, an American company built a toaster that lowered the bread by itself, watched it brown with a strip of bending metal, lifted it without a sound, and got it perfect every single time, and was built to do that every morning for 50 years. It did not need a motor. It did not need a chip. It did not need a timer or an electromagnet or a single thing that could quietly fail. It needed only levers, springs, heat, and an idea clever enough that the engineers who study it today admit it humbles them. America could build that. America did build that. And then America put it down. Not because it found something better, nothing better has appeared in 75 years, but because something better was bad for business. A toaster that never breaks sells once. A toaster that breaks sells forever. So the chrome gave way to plastic. The sensor gave way to the timer. The 50-year machine gave way to the 5-year machine. And the country that had built the toughest toaster ever made chose deliberately to make worse ones. The toaster still works. That's the haunting part. Drop in 2 slices on a unit built before your parents were born, and it will hand you back a perfect golden morning, exactly as it did in 1955. A small chrome monument to the moment America knew how to build things to last, and decided not to. If forgotten American stories like this one are worth remembering, subscribe. There's another one already warming up.